Initially, soldiers served 3 years in the Soviet Army's ground forces and 4 years in the Navy. However, in 1967, a reform of military service terms was carried out. The term of service in the Navy was reduced to 3 years, and in the ground forces and Air Force to 2 years. It was then that the famous expression, 730 days in boots, appeared. Exactly how long soldiers spent in barracks, on training grounds, on guard duty, and in exercises. Conscription into the army was perceived differently by the people. Some regarded it as an inevitable duty, while others saw it as a chance to escape their village, republic, or district, see the world, and try something new. As they joked at the time, "Who's taking me to the army?" Grandpa picked. Breakfast with the family was like a last supper, and when you arrived at the medical commission, you felt like you were about to take an exam into the unknown. I went through everything, signed everything, and didn't say a word. I waited for the army as lovers wait for their wedding, with excitement, fear, and hope for change. In the same year, 1967, future TV presenter Vladimir Berezin was drafted into the ground forces of the Air Force. He ended up in the ZAS, Secret Communications Unit, and recalled this with surprise. "I thought it would be the Army, but it was completely different. People I didn't know, conditions I didn't know, rules I didn't know. This was somewhere far from my village. I'm from a village in the Oryol region, and here I was, suddenly in Mongolia. They told us, you will serve in Ulaanbaatar. Straight abroad. It was like entering a different life. Was I lucky? Maybe." For many young men from the provinces, the army really was a gateway to the big world. It gave them the opportunity to break out of the closed circle of the village or workers' settlement, to acquire discipline and confidence, to make friends, and sometimes even to find their first love through letters with girls who had stayed at home. After their service, former soldiers often found it easier to enter prestigious universities, especially with the benefits available, and then to pursue a career. Military service was perceived as a school of life. It broke down teenage selfishness and fostered character and collectivism. In the army, each individual, inevitably became part of the collective we, where everything was clear: who was responsible for the regulations, who was on duty, who was in charge of ammunition, and who was in charge of the stove in the kitchen. At the same time, in large cities, the motivation to serve was different. There, young men often sought to dodge the army, legally or not so legally. Some enrolled in an institute with a military department and, after graduation, were awarded the rank of reserve lieutenant, and were not called up for service. Others got jobs at defense enterprises, which provided a so-called reservation, a deferment from the army. And some even faked illnesses. They forged medical certificates, pretended to have mental disorders, and went to absurd lengths to get out of the army. "Why do you need so much haloperidol?" they asked at the pharmacy. "So I'll take it, and they'll take me to the loony bin, just so I don't have to serve," was the answer. Some went on the run, went into hiding, lived without registration, like ghosts. There were also those who hoped that the summons would never come. But then one day, that day arrives. You open your mailbox and find a summons from the Military Registration and Enlistment Office. The summons from the Military Registration and Enlistment Office clearly states everything: the date, time, and exact location where the conscript must report. Usually, a young man is given a few days to prepare, put his affairs in order, and, of course, say goodbye to his loved ones. During this short but very important period, life is filled with special emotions: anxious anticipation, pride, excitement, and, at times, an inner fear of the unknown. As they say, while you eat, wait for the Military Registration and Enlistment Office, and when the summons arrives, go forth to defend the motherland. Now the young man has only one thing left to do: to leave with dignity, and his loved ones, to see him off with dignity. After all, seeing someone off to the army in the Soviet Union was not just a custom, it was a real ritual, in a sense, a small family initiation ceremony. This send-off became a symbolic beginning of army life, the first drill, only not in the barracks, but among family and friends. In villages and collective farms, the whole village gathered before the draft. Often, a solemn send-off was held in the club or on the square, with speeches by the chairman, concert performances, the presentation of commemorative gifts and orders, Don't tarnish the glorious name of our collective farm. Be an excellent student in combat and political training. In a word, don't disgrace us." There was applause, songs, and mothers' tears mixed with the laughter of comrades. Everything was genuine. As one native of Moldova recalled, "It was customary for us. If a guy went into the army, the whole street, or even the whole village, would see him off. No less than 50 people, and that's if it was quiet. With songs, toasts, and accordion music. People walked in a column to the bus or train station. And somewhere you could hear, 'Let me go down the hill,' the accordion played, and someone could no longer hold back their tears." In cities, farewell parties were held in their own way, but no less boisterously. As writer Yuri Polyakov recalls, he was drafted into the army after graduating from university. There was no military department. He was sent to serve in the artillery in the GDR. "They saw me off as they should," he said. Several days, first with relatives, then with classmates, then with fellow students. And, of course, with girlfriends. Everything was as it should be. We sang, drank, laughed, and were silent. Even the hangover was collective. Everyone who came to see us off brought something for the next day. They knew how hard it would be in the morning. There was also a special tradition among conscripts and their friends, a ritual with a bottle for the return. On the day of the farewell, the company drank half a bottle of vodka with the future soldier. The other half was solemnly sealed, dated, wrapped in newspaper, and hidden in a secluded place. Often, it was hidden under a shed, in a basement, or even buried. The meaning was simple: to finish the bottle in the same company, but 2 or 3 years later, when the soldier returned from the army. It was a symbol of hope, expectation, and friendship, tested by time and distance. Before the train took the recruit to the barracks, friends, relatives, and neighbors all tried to give him a parting gift, a wish, or an amulet. Some gave a cross to wear, others a homemade icon or a note with kind words. Some girls gave a pendant, a ribbon, or a photograph so that he would not forget. For many, it was not only a farewell, but also a fateful moment. Pianist Levon Oganezov was drafted into the army in 1960, after his first year at the conservatory. In a heavy tank regiment, a loader is not just a position, but one of the key combat professions. Everything must be honed to perfection. As soon as the commander gives the command, "Fire," the loader is already in motion. He clearly, quickly, and accurately feeds the shell into the breech, because not only the success of the shot, but also the lives of the entire crew depend on his reaction and dexterity. A mistake here can be costly. The shell weighs about 16 kilograms, and the recoil of the gun is so powerful that it can blow off half your face if you don't pull your hand back in time. They work in unison, almost like a single organism: the commander, the gunner, the mechanic driver, and, of course, the loader, one for all and all for one. Many recruits joined the army for the first time and were far from home. Like the hero of the story, for example. He flew on an airplane for the first time when he was flying to the army. Before that, the furthest he had traveled was by train with his parents to the sea. First, there was a flight to Khabarovsk, and then a train to Spassk Dalny, a small garrison town where the school for junior aviation specialists was located. He became a weapons specialist, with a diploma in bomb and small arms weapons. Of course, many people imagine the army as constant marches, shooting automatic weapons, throwing grenades, running with gas masks, dirt, sweat, and training exercises. All of this is true. But army life is much more multifaceted. It flows in several dimensions at once. There is life during training exercises, harsh, disciplined, and intense. There is life in the barracks. Here, everything depends on the schedule, the company commander, and the mood of the senior soldiers. And there is another, almost invisible layer, informal army life, which begins after lights out. In each of these dimensions, a recruit must learn to navigate and survive. One of the first tests for a newcomer is to master the basics of everyday life. How to properly roll up footcloths so as not to rub your feet in felt boots. For city boys, this is a real quest. Or, for example, sewing a collar, a ritual of army cleanliness and precision. No less than 12 stitches, each 2 to 3 centimeters long. And the collar must protrude exactly 2 to 3 millimeters beyond the neckline. Why exactly like that? The answer is standard, that's the rule. No discussion. Time flows differently in the Army. Wake up is on command, and it lasts exactly 45 seconds. Why exactly that long? Because that's how long a match burns. The commander lights a match, and if you haven't managed to make your bed, put on your uniform, and line up within that time, you can expect to be on duty out of turn. You can't relax at lights out either. Everything is according to the regulations. And the regulations, as they say, are not just a book, but a soldier's desk Bible. Serve according to the regulations, and you will earn honor and glory. If you don't know the regulations, you are weak in formation and weak in battle. If you know the regulations, your step is firmer, your back is straighter, and discipline becomes not a burden but a habit. But besides the regulations, there is another system, unspoken and much more complex. Each unit has its own hierarchy, an informal army table of ranks. It is not taught in political classes, but every recruit learns about it in the first hours of service. There are the spirits, the newly arrived rookies, the scoops, those who have already been through something, the pheasants, almost grandfathers, and, of course, the grandfathers, the lawmakers of order. Sometimes there are also elephants, those who serve longer than required. Military service is not just about routine, orders, and regulations. It also involves a complex informal hierarchy, where every conscript goes through certain stages. The first stage is salaga, or, as they say, spirit. This is someone who has just entered service. He knows nothing, is afraid of everything, and quickly realizes that the army is no walk in the park. The second 6 months is already churpak. He has adapted a little, begins to learn how to avoid getting beaten up and how to minimize suffering. Then comes skvorits, the third stage. For some, this name did not catch on. For others it became official. Each unit has its own slang, but the essence is the same. This is the period when you are no longer a rookie, but not yet an old-timer. And finally, the fourth 6 months, the status of old-timer. Almost the top. All that remains is to wait for demobilization, the order for which becomes your personal victory. After that, the last weeks of service are spent in a state of euphoria and complete impunity. Old men are not allowed. Sounds like a sentence for the young and like a medal for those who have served. Discharge is a sacred status. It's almost heroic. Everyone knows he's leaving, and they address him almost formally. And while the order is being signed, the discharged soldier sings a song in the kitchen or in the barracks, and the young soldiers count the number of performances. Come on, Salanok, sing. 1. Louder. 2. 3. 4. And so on ad infinitum, until the grandfather is satisfied. But this whole ladder of military advancement is built on hazing, an unspoken but harsh system where those with more seniority literally rule over their juniors. It determines everything: who will sweep the floors, who will stand guard, who will go on duty. Young soldiers are obliged to do everything to make the grandfathers comfortable. Wash their uniforms, not disturb their sleep, bring food from the kitchen, even clean their boots. After lights out, one of the recruits stays at the door to make sure there is no shohira, that is, that the commanders do not enter the barracks and see that the rules are being broken. Grandpa got up, ate, got dressed, and went to the airfield. And the young people went to the kitchen, on duty, cleaning, to the furnace, wherever. At the airfield, it's the same scenario. The grandfathers smoke, relax, watch TV, and play dominoes. And the younger ones were ordered to march forward, to service the equipment, sweep the hangars, dig, and haul. The commander would come out and ask, "Where is everyone?" And they would answer, "The young people have gone." The old men remained in the shadows, invisible but omnipotent. Future film producer Mark Rudenstein, who ended up in an air defense unit, recalled how at first he worked shifts for everyone. "I worked so many extra shifts," he says, "that I could have opened a cafe. 11 shifts in 1 week. 11. Out of the whole team, only one person was working, me. The other 5 were rookies who had just been brought in. The 3 of us washed all the dishes, 10,000 plates, mugs, and pots. Often, hazing, that is, non-statutory relations between soldiers based on length of service, is not only tacitly tolerated by officers, but actually encouraged. Unofficially, of course. An officer might wave it off. It's okay, let them beat the dust out of each other's pockets, it will instill discipline. This position is often explained simply. It is more convenient for the commander when order in the barracks is maintained by the soldiers themselves, especially the so-called old-timers, those who have been serving for a year or more. He knows that these guys will keep an eye on the young ones, make them sew on their collars, learn the regulations, and not let them slack off. It seems like there is order, and everyone goes to bed on time. But at what cost? No one asks that question anymore. Sometimes it turns into real terror. Behind the formal discipline lies violence, bullying, and intimidation. Sometimes it all starts as a game. For example, the infamous demobilization games. In one unit, future demobbers would organize a so-called demob train at night. They would sit until 4 in the morning, playing out fictional role-playing scenarios. Senior Sergeant Lavrov demanded tea from the conductors, called the passengers rookies, and demanded that they buy a ticket. All this was accompanied by punishments for insubordination, push-ups, cleaning the toilet, night marches down the corridor with a bedside table in their arms. It would seem absurd if it weren't so humiliating and cruel. Sometimes it ends in tragedy. In one unit, there was an incident where a guy from Vologda got into a conflict with a group of soldiers, presumably from the Caucasus region. He simply disappeared. A few days later, he was found at the training ground, dead. Neither the officers nor his fellow soldiers could explain what had happened. A formal investigation was conducted, but the real culprits were never found. Hazing is swept under the rug like a terrible secret. Physical abuse is a separate issue. Push-ups. 1, 2. Face up. Hold. 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 One recruit recalled how 5 or 6 people piled on top of him. He fought back as best he could because he was strong and had played sports at school. But even such guys, healthy, from villages, Ukrainians, Russians, broke down under the pressure of daily humiliation. And yet, even among the old-timers, there were honest, kind guys who refused to participate in this. One of them said, "I was already a grandfather, I became a squad leader. But I never punished anyone. I felt sorry for these guys. I went through it myself, I know how painful it is. And I immediately told my guys, if anyone humiliates anyone else, they'll have to deal with me." A strong, hard-working country boy ends up not just anywhere, but at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the holy grail of Soviet cosmonautics. It was there, in the late 1970s, that the future famous lawyer Anatoly Kucherina served. Military service at such a strategic facility did not negate the harsh realities of military life. Hazing, the dark side of army life, was rampant here as well. But at Baikonur, they did not stand on ceremony. Show trials were held for the elders who were guilty of cruel treatment of young soldiers. One case even reached the criminal courts. According to rumors, one of the recruits had his eye knocked out. Those involved in the assault were sentenced to 8 years in prison. After that, silence fell. It seemed that the issue was closed. However, people only began to speak openly about non-statutory relations in the late 1980s, when the country began to change and topics that had recently been considered taboo began to be raised. In the fall of 1987, Yuri Polyakov's novel 100 Days Before the Order was published. It was a sensation. For the first time, the army was shown not as heroic and victorious, but as real, alive, cruel, and absurd. The novel was literally snatched from people's hands. The magazine Yunost with this publication was impossible to find. Soon, a film of the same name was made based on the book, which caused a storm of controversy. Some reproached Polyakov for denigrating the army, while others, on the contrary, said that he had portrayed it too softly and that in reality it was much harsher. The author himself said in an interview, "I described the unit in which I myself served. Nothing was made up. Here's an example. I, the commander, give the order, get into the push-up position. The soldier is tired and does the push-up slowly. I say to him, 'You're slacking off, come on, 30 more.' That was the norm. At that time, There were simple sayings in the army, such as, "Be stingy and remember, discharge is inevitable." But time passed, and the rookies turned into sergeants, then into pheasants, and finally into grandfathers and old men. "Look at these handsome men." The officers proudly showed off a group of soldiers who had already served a year and a half and were preparing for discharge. Everything repeated itself. A vicious circle. Nevertheless, there were happy exceptions. Guys who had talent, who could draw, sing, play musical instruments, or write poetry, often found themselves in good standing and were able to avoid heavy duty. They were entrusted with designing wall newspapers, performing at army celebrations, and participating in cultural events. For example, Levon Oganezov, the future famous pianist and showman, was assigned to a tank regiment at the beginning of his service. At first, it was ordinary service, hard work, morning exercises, and ironing collars. But soon his talent was noticed, and he ended up in the military orchestra, where he served as a bass drummer. And the bass drum is not just a musical instrument, it is almost a separate type of service. It is huge, weighs a lot, and has to be hung on the chest with special straps so as not to tear it. And then there are the notes that you have to keep in front of your eyes, while marching in step with the orchestra, listening to commands and looking dignified. Once, during a parade rehearsal, everything went wrong. The command, "To the left." Private Levon Oganezov, then a complete novice, obediently turns and knocks down the clarinetist standing in front of him. The drum booms, the musicians are in shock, the orchestra falters. And then, the sharp voice of the commander, "Nazarov," the general said, "Don't let this little one on the parade anymore." That was the end of Levon's career in military events. But he still had the stage and his favorite job. Private Valery Syutkin, serving in the city of Spassk-Dalny, played at dances in the officers' club. His army was rhythm, rehearsals, concerts, girls in the audience, and long evenings under the stage lights. He recalls, "The service was like this. We worked at the airfield during the day, and in the evenings we had music, rehearsals, and dances. And the closer you got to discharge, the less you worked. It was an unspoken agreement. Discharge was sacred." And indeed, Valery returned home not just as a veteran, but as a confident drummer, bass guitarist, and even an improved vocalist. But army life is not always about the stage and applause. For Anis Safronov, who served in the missile units in Estonia, things were different. He drew paintings, sketches, portraits, sometimes on scraps of paper, sometimes on the back of reports. But his creativity was not understood by his officer instructor. He grabbed his holster, and I thought he was about to shoot me. He yelled, poured gasoline on my paintings, and set them on fire right in front of me. And he said, "Son, I'm going to burn you to ashes." The officer threw the drawings into the fire one by one, as if he were burning not paper, but individuality. And when it burned out, he came up, patted me on the shoulder. "You're like a son to me. I'll teach you to be a real soldier," Safronov recalled. But no matter how army life turned out, closer to discharge, everyone was equal in one thing, the countdown. They took a regular pocket calendar, with a gray cover and miniature squares for each month, and pierced it with a needle every day. The day has passed, a whole, a kind of army meditation. The responsibility for piercing the calendar falls on one of the Saliks. Moreover, he must remember by heart how many days are left until discharge for each of the old men. But the most important thing in a soldier's life is, of course, the discharge uniform. It is not just clothing, it is a manifesto, an era, a parade of vanity with which the soldier returns home a hero, even if quietly, even without fanfare. You have to return home with style, glamour, and panache, so that people turn around at the train station, the village envies you, and your classmates bite their elbows. To achieve this, the trousers are hemmed to the point of impossibility, so that only boots with soap can be pulled on. They are impregnated with epoxy resin to keep their shape, as if the soldier had stepped straight out of a shop window. LPNs, shoulder pads, or simply stiff inserts are inserted into the epaulets so that they stand upright and jingle with badges. And the badges are a religion unto themselves. They are collected over many years, guards, excellence, for distinction in military service, military emblems, flags, parachutes, tanks, rockets. They adorn the chest of the demobilized soldier like a general's, but with soul and humor. And on top of that, a greatcoat soaked in sweat and memories. On the greatcoat, there are dozens of chevrons, and sometimes a phrase painted on it, "I'm back. Alive. Handsome." And, of course, epaulets, the pinnacle of demobilization art. They are woven from parachute straps, making clever knots and twists, and all this is crafted by young people under the strict supervision of the demobilized soldier himself, who explains each loop. Here's a figure 8, and here's a lock. Don't get them mixed up. Weaving it incorrectly is almost an insult. And the cap. Oh, the cap is a separate art form. The brim is turned up at the edges, like an officer's cap. A huge hoop is inserted inside so that the cap is twice the size of the head and looks like a crown. When the demob walks across the parade ground wearing it, all he needs is a mouthpiece to march to the Slavianka March. Drawing strength from our native land. The loudspeakers boom in the barracks, and our political officer says with a serious face, "The harsh guard duty of past years will pass, but we will never forget our strong army friendship." And the greatcoat? The very one we wrapped ourselves in during the winter, like the burqa in Lermontov's portrait. Now, of course, it is no longer needed, lying somewhere in the village, given to my father, who has retired. No sopos, no guard duty. But then, at the age of 20, I wanted to be a hero who returned home like a general from the front. Another sacred tradition is the demobilization album. It is a veritable encyclopedia of army life, an illustrated memoir, a chronicle of platoon glory. People work on it for weeks, enlisting the most talented artists among their fellow soldiers. On the cover are tanks, planes, pigeons, and inscriptions. "We served, we did not grieve, the army is a school of life, 3 years like one day." Inside are photographs, drawings, clippings, an authentic draft notice, and an order from the Minister of Defense of the USSR on discharge into the reserve. The order is a sacred document, published in the newspapers Krasnaya Zvezda, Red Star, or Sovetskaya Armia, Soviet Army, at the end of March and the end of September. These issues of the newspapers are extremely rare, and future demobbers will do anything to get their hands on them. The order of the Minister of Defense of the USSR is solemnly pasted in the middle of the demobilization album, like the heart of the entire Army Chronicle. And next to it, on the left side of the page, is a portrait of a girl, cut out of a magazine or brought from home. Sometimes real, sometimes just an image, a symbol of expectation, love, hope. Where it goes afterwards, no one knows. Maybe it will be hidden deep in a desk drawer or dissolve into a new life. But at that moment, it is like a beacon. Next to it are the wishes of fellow soldiers. Sometimes sincere, sometimes humorous, sometimes with army roughness, but always with warmth. Someone writes, "Don't forget the air defense guys from Transbaikalia," someone else adds. "Don't wait for your discharge, come yourself," and someone else diligently writes out a poem composed at night under the covers. They lifted leaden boulders. The treacherous Barak lay in wait. But while Kandaba was on guard, not even a mouse could slip through. Poems were composed and recorded directly in the album, calling on the most creative and educated fighters from among the newly arrived youth for help. Some had talent, others simply had a sense of rhyme and irony. A mandatory condition was to insert surnames, nicknames, and army jokes that only their own people could understand. "Shout out the surname," the old-timers joke, forcing the newcomer to compose at least a line about a colleague named Slyosarenko or Kazekov. The surnames were elaborate, from all corners of the vast Union, from Brest to Petropavlovsk, from Grozny to Arkhangelsk. "I've never done this before," says one. "Well, I'm no poet." Another, on the contrary, says, "What, am I not a human being? I'll do it too. I will. I will." But not everyone likes this demobilization fashion. Someone remarks ironically, "This is provincialism. Am I an idiot, keeping a demobilization album?" But a couple of years later, looking through other people's albums, he suddenly regrets it. "What a fool I am. If I had one now, I would remember everything." Demobilization is still far away, but Sunday is a day off, and for many it is a breath of freedom. Those who excel in combat and political training receive leave, real leave, with a signature and a stamp. And then, forward, to the city, to cafes, to the cinema, to girls, to ice cream and dreams. Soldiers go like schoolchildren on a date with life. Their boots are polished, their shirts are ironed, their eyes are shining. But it is important not to get caught by the patrol. The military patrol can find fault with anything. A button is not fastened, a belt is not regulation, boots are dusty, and that's it, the leave is cancelled, and it's back to the unit. And if there is no leave, but you want it, then the desertion begins. Self-drive, as they call it. Some quietly slip out over the fence. Some hide in the back of a truck. Some try to negotiate with the officer on duty, promising to return sober, on time, and with pies from the city. They were all about 20 years old, maybe a little older. Young, but compared to us, they were real veterans, older brothers with military experience and strong bearing. We were 18, green as spring leaves, but they already looked like men, with steady gazes and army habits. They all went to dances, tried to look civilian to impress girls, covered their epaulets with their overcoat collars, and rolled up their sleeves. At dances, they were kings. Each had his favorite perfume, Souvenir or Red Moscow, just to be sure. And of course, for our friend Kolya, there was a special song. His girlfriend was in the hall, and the music sounded like something from a movie. For you, Kolya, my beloved. I said to him, Kolya, if you go to your girlfriend, leave your phone. If something happens, I'll call you, and you'll come running back like the wind. He nodded. Okay, brother, or maybe I'll just climb over the fence, like last time. So we went. Nico Safronov, as always, came along for the company. There were no girls that evening. They just didn't show up. They tricked us. And we stood there like fools in the cold. Meanwhile, as it turned out, they were already looking for us all over the base, with drums, headlights, and, as they say, with a spark. The commanders were already on high alert, and alarming reports had been sent upstairs. When we returned to the unit, we were lined up in the morning on the parade ground, in front of the entire regiment, as a living example of how not to do it. The frost, the crunch of boots, the drill command, and you stand there, sweating under the gaze of 200 people. After such an unsuccessful unauthorized absence, it was a straight road to the guardhouse, or, to put it simply, to jail. But Kolya was lucky. The head of the guardhouse urgently needed portraits of his wife and daughter, which he wanted to give as a gift for some family anniversary. "Do you draw?" he asked Koka. "Well, sort of." "Then grab a pencil and get to work." And so, instead of uniforms and bunks, he sat with an album and ink, sketching faces. The portraits turned out well. The chief was pleased and patted him on the shoulder. "If anything happens, come straight to me. We have, so to speak, two heads here, one commands, the other draws." And Koka was really lucky. He had a good time on guard duty, without hazing or unnecessary noise, and even tea in a thermos on schedule. Sometimes he was even allowed to go outside to draw, under the pretext of creative necessity. And every Sunday in the army was another ritual. At 10 a.m. on schedule, the TV was turned on, and the whole company sat down to watch the program, I Serve the Soviet Union. The soldiers themselves ironically call it visiting a fairy tale. Because everyone understands that it has little to do with real army life. Everything there is beautiful, heroic, everyone on the parade ground is united, caps are shining, commanders are smiling. But here, our boots are covered in mud, our footcloths are wet, the construction is unfinished, the hangar is drafty, and the kettle hasn't boiled in a long time. Yes, of course, we had real combat training, the sky roared with turbines, and serious work was going on both on the ground and in the air. I served at the supply point of the 1st Separate Fighter Bomber Division. Every day, I accepted equipment, checked documentation, supplied spare parts, worked with transport, and delivered fuel and lubricants. And when the duty officer at the command post had a break, he watched TV, while we sat with our tablets and drew. Here it comes, through these narrow, dimly lit corridors, inside a huge, humming, almost living organism, a Soviet aircraft heading abroad. It leads, it controls. And if he strays from the course, leaves the corridor laid out by diplomats, navigators, satellites, and international agreements, it's all over, a disaster. One wrong maneuver, and he'll be in foreign skies, for example, over China. And in those years, relations with China were tense. Political tension, ideological rivalry, constant conflicts on the border. Violated airspace. There will be no lengthy investigations. They'll shoot him down on the spot, no questions asked. That's why it's so important how you do your job, how much they trust you. After all, not only your life depends on it, the fate of the crew, the plane, the mission, even an international scandal. They trust you not just as a soldier, as a person of honor and intelligence, as a fighter in peacetime, on the front lines of the Cold War. Soviet soldiers in that era were not just warehouse guards and night watchmen. They were on the front lines far from home, often with no right to make mistakes and no right to glory. They participated in dozens of secret military operations, providing support to countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, where they helped friendly governments fight rebels or imperialists. And even if the newspapers don't write about it, their chests are adorned with real combat orders and medals. For courage, Red Star, for military merit. Space was not spared from conscription either. Conscripts ensured the security and functioning of the Baikonur launch sites, prepared equipment, and served at facilities that most of the country's population did not even know existed. Yes, there were units where the main workload consisted of drill training, uniforms, and regulations. But there were also those where it was necessary to sit at instruments, study diagrams, know the devices down to the smallest contacts, and calculate parameters. It was called intellectual service, where every mistake could lead to a launch failure, system failure, or even a rocket explosion. However, despite all this, the prestige of the Army began to fade. Against the backdrop of increasingly loud stories about hazing, arbitrariness, and humiliation in the barracks, confidence in the service was falling. And in order to restore the heroic image of the soldier, the Ministry of Defense, together with film studios, decided that the Army needed a new legend on the screen. The era of heroic Army action films began, with strong, brave, noble paratroopers appearing on screen, fighting not only enemies but also themselves and their own weaknesses. In the Zone of Special Attention and Counterattack were huge hits at the Soviet box office. After these films, young people literally rushed to join the airborne forces. At the Ryazan school, there were up to 20 applicants for each place. Military service once again began to be perceived as a feat, an honor, and the work of real men. In this unofficial Army hierarchy, the airborne forces and the Marine Corps took the top spots in the rankings. It is believed that a real soldier is someone who can stand up for himself in any situation, who does not lose his composure in battle, who is able to cover his comrades, who does not just wear a uniform, but lives by it. This is exactly how paratroopers and Marines see themselves. Two branches of the military that have always been, are, and will continue to be engaged in a silent but fierce rivalry. Who is cooler, the Black Berets or the Blue ones? It was in 1967 that the airborne troops were granted the right to wear berets and undershirts. It was more than just an element of the uniform. It was a sign of distinction, a sign of honor, a symbol of strength. However, few people know that the first VDV berets were not blue at all, but crimson. Only 2 years later, in 1969, the beret was dyed the color of the sky, freedom, and height, with which paratroopers would be associated for decades to come. By this time, the Soviet Marine Corps already had its own distinctive attribute, a black beret, dating back to the days of sailors' pea jackets and revolutionary romanticism. Black as the night before battle. Strict like the naval code itself. And between these two troops who defy death, whether in the sky or on the water, there is an eternal debate. Who is more resilient, who is more dangerous, who is closer to the ideal of a true fighter? But pride in the uniform, in the epaulets, in the emblem, is characteristic of every branch of the military. Tankers have their heroes, signalmen have their legends, and rocket troops have their anthems. Each branch of the military honors its history, traditions, and mottos. Each has its own professional holiday. There is Tank Day, Artillery Day, Missile Forces Day, Signal Corps Day, and Air Defense Day. And in every military unit, this day is a small personal victory, a day when the entire unit is on the parade ground, receiving congratulations from commanders, certificates, honorary letters, and honorary leave. Special attention is paid to the strategic missile forces. Here, service was considered particularly intellectual, responsible, and elite. It is not just standing by the missiles. It is standing guard over the very security of the country, deterring nuclear war, an invisible front where every mistake could cost millions of lives. We are not just soldiers, they said. We stand guard at the gates of heaven. But no matter how different the branches of the military were, one holiday was common to all. One day that they had been waiting for from the moment they put on their boots and greatcoats. That day was demobilization. A solemn formation. The anthem. The order. The commander's voice, which ignites a fire in the chest. In accordance with the order of the Minister of Defense of the USSR, consider Sergeant Rickman, Sergeant Guryanov, and Junior Sergeant Burkov to have completed their term of service and to be discharged into the reserve. At that moment, time seems to stand still. It becomes difficult to breathe. Some hide their tears, some laugh, some just stare silently at the sky, trying to realize that everything is behind them. Letters, boots, uniforms, hazing, field trips, shooting, guard duty, training, constant alarms. All of this will now remain only in memory, in the discharge album, in stories that will be told to friends or sons before they enter college. But it also happens that at the very last moment, just before discharge, an unexpected order comes from the commander. You are dismissed. But before that, one last task. This is called the discharge cord, a final march, duty, departure, patrol, or some kind of special assignment that is supposed to mark the end of the entire service. Sometimes it happens that the discharge order has already been signed, the name of the demobilized soldier has been solemnly announced at the roll call, but he is not going home tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Because there is one small task that needs to be completed urgently. For example, there is a pile of earth near the headquarters that needs to be cleared, leveled, planted with grass, and decorated with fir trees so that everything shines like in a parade. And it is clear that no demobilized soldier with a shovel will go there. Everything will be done by those who have only recently put on the uniform. Young people, or as they are also called, salig. In 2 days, everything is smooth, as if drawn with a ruler. No piles, fresh greenery, and even a flagpole in the center. But sometimes it gets worse. The order came in October, and you're going home on December 31st. And not because that's how the system works, but because you behaved unworthily, violated the chain of command, got caught. In short, you blew it before your discharge for no reason. As in one story, told with irony but without pathos. We brought the girls to the officers' club. Well, the usual stuff started: music, dancing, drinking. Everything was going fine until there was a knock at the door. And who opened it? Of course, it was me, shouting, "Who's there?" And it was the head of the Army's political department. My Jewish luck, as I say now. In short, they let me go home last, on December 31st, when there was no reason to keep me anymore. But despite everything, everyone goes home. One after another, some in third-class carriages, some in compartments, some with 3 changes, some with music and accordions, and some silently, looking out the window. They are being replaced by a new generation, who are just putting on their boots, just learning to roll up their footcloths, and do not yet know that demobilization is inevitable. And after service, life goes on and paths diverge. Some become firefighters, some join the police, some go to sea, and some become musicians or artists. But the shared past, experienced in the barracks, in training, in uniforms, in pranks and punishments, remains forever. It is a brotherhood, a memory, a special army mark on the soul that cannot be washed away by time or civilian clothes. The army, says writer Yuri Polyakov, taught me to value time. I knew everything about the piano. But every day matters, organizing my own day, discipline, that was difficult. The army taught me all that. And I am grateful. I wrote more than 100 poems there, and it was there that the idea for the story 100 Days Before the Order was born, which ultimately made me famous. So, to call a spade, I don't just have no regrets. I believe that the army gave me a lot. And when I, already an artist with an honorary title, arrived at a tank unit on tour, I didn't even think that my military past would come back to haunt me. The unit commander found out somewhere that I had once served in the 62nd Tank Regiment in my youth. The concert went well, with songs about the motherland, about love, about true male friendship. And after the performance, right on the parade ground, he stepped up to the podium and announced loudly, "Comrades in arms! Today we have a distinguished artist as our guest, but first and foremost, he is a soldier who served in a tank unit." Lev Valerianovich Leshchenko completed his service with the rank of corporal, but by order of the unit, as a sign of recognition and gratitude, I am awarding him the rank of senior sergeant. Applause. Laughter. Smiles. No longer a boy, no longer a rookie, but a gray-haired artist, and back in the ranks, at least symbolically. And this is not just a beautiful story. It is about the connecting thread that does not break even after decades. An old army cap, worn only 2 or 3 times in a lifetime, at discharge, for a photo in an album, and perhaps at a meeting with fellow soldiers, is still carefully stored in a closet. Because for a former soldier, it is not just a headdress, it is a symbol of an era, emotions, youth, trials, camaraderie, and inner growth. Some remember their service with nostalgia, some with pride, and some with bitterness and pain, especially if they had to go through difficult relationships, cruel hazing, or meaningless duties. But in any case, no one forgets the Army. Because 2 winters and 2 summers in boots are more than just 730 days. It is a school where everyone learns to be part of a team, where character, willpower, and a sense of duty are tested. It is a time when letters from home are like precious gems, and black and white photographs in a discharge album are like relics.